Hello, everybody, and welcome to this latest in the ValuesJam guest session series. Jack, fantastic to have you here. And to kick off, please introduce yourself and tell everybody about the great work that you do.
Certainly. Thank you, first and foremost, Alan, for just opening this space. And indeed, my name is Jack Stephenson Buschman. Who I am and what I am, first and foremost, is human in the truest sense of the word. And the work that I do within that is multifaceted. For one, I'm a musician, and I seek to bring as much of my the wisdom and education which I've learned through the likes of hip hop, etc., to the fore in learning experiences as well as entertainment experiences. I'm also a recruiter, and within that, I prefer to use the term connector in that regard, really seeking to understand what both a client as well as a professional's needs, and perhaps even more importantly, their true desires are within the realm of work, and how they invest their time. And this, ties me into the work that I do within soul.com. And this is really an engine of my entire being and service that I seek to provide. Um, and in that realm, what we do, or what I do, is one-on-one facilitation and coaching, group team facilitation and coaching, and primarily accompaniment. So walking people through the wooded landscape that is their lives, professionally and personally, and being a trusted companion along that journey in whatever form makes sense for the client in that particular instance. So if you're navigating any forms of transition, seeking to invite transformation into your life in any sense, and you need and desire a springboard for thoughts, sharing of dialogue, then please reach out to me. You can find me very simply at jack@soul.com. So at soul.com, or by phone, which Dutch +316 43442711. Yeah, that's me.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jack. I want to pick up on just a couple of things that you mentioned there. So first, musician,
Yeah,
and the connection with Values Jam here is that we based it on the concept of a music jam,
yeah,
because in a music jam, you just turn up with what you've got.
yeah,
Nobody judges you. You are given no direction. You just start
yeah,
and you see where you're going to go. Then, if somebody stumbles, nobody calls proceedings to a halt and conducts an inquisition. It's
yeah.
just embraced and built on, and you go again.
Cool.
And so when we were thinking about normal conversations, we were thinking, wouldn't it be cool to create something that enabled that kind of free flowing, go where you want to go sense of freedom in a conversation rather than the kind of very structured, probably motivated to get to a certain place way that we conduct conversations in our normal lives. So there's a great connection with your background there. And then the other thing I wanted to mention was you being in recruitment, because from quite an early age, I've been fascinated by the industry because it's the only industry, I think, where you're servicing two clients at the same time.
Yeah.
There's nothing else like that, right?
To my knowledge, no. I always find it interesting in conversations. I've been coming upon it a few moments recently where I seek to say to people, a professional, at the end of the day, you're my main concern when I'm having a conversation with you. And likewise, when I'm speaking with the company or the client in that particular moment, you're my most important focus. And when I stand in between those two, I seek to take the boast of Bethwell's, obviously, knowing there's always going to be some form of compromise. And it is an interesting landscape in that regard. And to my knowledge, at least in this exact moment, there's nothing that's cropping up where that is the case as well. In other spaces.
Mm. And how do you cope with the kind of bad rep that some people in that sector have? Because I don't know why this has come to mind, but I remember I probably was in my 20s and I went to see a recruitment consultant.
Yeah.
And I had had a career in conference and banqueting event management in hotels, right?
Yeah.
And that's what my CV read. And so what I said to this person was, I really want to do something different to
Mm.
avoid being pigeonholed as a conference and events person for five-star hotels. And so, what can you suggest that I do? And he said, well, let me just go and speak to a couple of people, a couple of my colleagues, and I'll come back to you. Just, he left me for like 5 or 10 minutes, came back and said, we've got this great job in a five-star hotel as a conference and events manager. It's like,
Yeah.
it was just the easy sell that he wanted, right?
Literally. And the way that I see to navigate that and to do things differently is, and I think that's reflective of not just my own personal stance, but the company Spargle is do things differently. And everyone says that they do things differently. But the means by which we do that is just a time investment. So many people, especially in this realm, are simply treated as a number. And in many respects, understandably so. I mean, the market is, I mean, there's how many billion of us now, and we all need jobs at a certain point in our lives. And so, for certain companies and industries who are still stuck in archaic means of navigating and relating, firstly with themselves, right, and secondly with the broader world around them, my kind of diagnosis on that is they're simply utilizing outdated models which don't serve the needs of people now. I think we've all learned through the 70s, 80s, 90s that connection is, intrinsic to our sense of well-being, also in the workplace and how well we actually show up in the world. And I still notice it. There's plenty of people which, in some respects, are our competitors who operate in this super fast pace, maximum like 50-minute calls with people and on to the next one, simply seeking, okay, do they fit this box I need them to? Yes, great. If not, in many respects or instances, they're even ignored. You don't even get a message. Um, and it's very, for us or myself, it's very easy. Just send that additional message, even if it's bad news. But simply reminding people that I see them at least, regardless whether the company is paid more attention or not. Oftentimes that may not be the case. Nevertheless, the simple 5 additional minutes, ask someone how their family is doing, and open up a portal of receptivity and connection, which is just slightly larger than can you do this job? And to listen, I see a lot of people who are doing a particular role, and I'm recognize that they're completely capable in that regard. And at the same time, I know that you could do various other things and simply be inquisitive. And a lot of people in this line of work don't give themselves permission as a recruiter to be inquisitive. It's also not incentivized, right? If you're getting bonuses and things of that nature, you don't get that for not placing someone in a role that you're being paid for, but connecting them with a friend of yours. Um, Even though connecting them with a friend of yours, in my perspective, that's the real job. It's putting someone in connection with something which can be a constructive step in their lives. Whether we make money off of that or not, my personal perspective, that's not my concern. If I can support you, then I'm doing my job as a connector truly should.
Yeah, it's great listening to that position. You've reminded me of I was hiring somebody in the facilities management environment,
Yeah.
and the recruiter that we dealt with always used to give us what he called a wild card.
Mm.
So this was somebody who didn't really fit the bill,
Yeah.
but he had a feel that they were a good person and we might be interested.
Yeah.
And this particular person that I'm thinking of, we did hire her, and she's gone on to become very senior in the corporate real estate industry. And I look back on that going, good job. That was the right decision for the business at that time. And it was definitely the right decision and for her, and she's done really, really well. So I think you're absolutely right about how so many people are kind of so narrow in the way that they look at this stuff and leave so much on the table. The reason why, I guess, is because it's really difficult to have faith in that unknown, because that's what
Yes.
we're talking about.
100%. Um, and that takes practice, right? It takes practice, and in many respects, it takes not being alone in that space. You need some form of example, even within your job or not, which uh, connects us to that space of possibility is always present. Just are we utilizing our apparatus and material to see it properly? And I think this also touches on intuition as well,
Yeah.
uh, and giving ourselves permission to actually utilize that in a business space too. You know, more often than not, I forget who the guy's name. I think it's Ken Robinson or something, where he had the TED talk, and he said, nowadays our bodies are essentially just vehicles for our heads to meetings and things like this. And I thought that was such a fun way of describing, especially in the West, a lot of how we go about working and relating to the world. And we leave this whole other expansive interiority aside in our decision making. So, not very much allowing our hearts and our curiosity, and like you say, giving someone a chance,
Yeah.
see what happens. Take a risk.
It's like, what's the worst thing that can happen, right? Rather than being scared of getting it wrong, type of thing. So
Exactly.
we've already started jamming, but we're going to choose a card to guide us now.
Yeah.
So, how many piles would you like me to make in front of me?
4.
Four. Okay, you're very definite with that number. That's good. And so now I've got pile number one to my left and pile number four to my right. So which number pile would you like? One, two, three, or four?
Number 3.
Number three. And we've got 3, 6, 9, 13 cards. So a number between 1 and 13.
7.
7. Okay. So what do you think about that?
So fitted.
Right. Come on. What's going on?
This is so beautiful, Alan. There's been 3 or 4, maybe even 5 different conversations, even in the past 5 days, that I've been having with individuals, which have centered around this concept of, I would say, concept as well as practice of faith. And it's close association with values as well. And it's one of those serendipitous moments of, similar to how we had our first conversation. And now, in this instance, you pick up that card just off of the
Well,
back of
it's not me, it's you. You were the one. And
the.
you were so definite about your numbers. It almost felt like you were making your way to something in particular. So maybe you were. But the first question is this, right? So just to help to get us into it. So what does faith mean? And what does it look, feel, and sound like?
Wow. Wow. What does faith mean? Um, I think and I feel that faith means taking the next step forward, regardless of whether you know that the ground is going to be there or not. Um, it's in a very simple sense, it's showing up to the bus stop, uh, expecting the bus to arrive. We don't know. We all of one of those acts, the next step, the simple showing up to the space of expectation. It's all faith, really. And so, what is faith? Yeah, it's choosing to continue proceeding forward without the assurance that that the outcome will be there in any shape or form.
Yeah, I think that's a really good kind of succinct way to go. And I found myself writing down something that echoes what you've just said. So
Yeah,
I wrote belief dot 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 beyond reason.
very much so. Yeah,
And then it struck me also that there's faith in a number of different dimensions. So I just started making a list. There's self, faith in self, faith in others, faith in circumstance, and
Mm.
I kind of that's where I stop. But it's kind of this multi-layered thing.
Completely. It is, and I think I think there is something deeply internal which subsequently can relate to each of them. I think there is one which is kind of the broader house, or the garden, if you will, and then each of those specifics are like flowers within that. Um, and what that specifically is, I can only connect to a sense of belonging, of like our soul's journey here just on earth, you know, and a faith in that we are part of something larger than just our individuated sense of selves. um, and then thereby, if we can cultivate a sense of knowing within that realm, then we can invite that same understanding, grounding, faith into our business practices, into our intimate relationships. And of course, the color, the shape, and the feel of it is specific to each of those. But there is a red thread, if you will, that's connecting each of them together. Um, and your question, when immediately when you said, "What does it sound like?" Just music came to mind, uh, and not a particular piece, but I always found music as a portal, in even to very young memories of age, that I immediately felt connected to something bigger than just me through sound. I found a sense of home, um, in different forms of music, and that's always remained the case. And it's a certain, it brings us into a proximity to beauty that language itself doesn't allow. And I think if we're really allowing for faith to take form in its most mature sense, language also isn't necessarily belonging in that house. You know, it's beyond, as you say, what reason itself can do on its own. Um, and invites a broader openness and a letting go, surrender.
Yeah. So you've reminded me of a story I'm going to share with you, which involves music and I think faith. So I had worked with a guy in hotels, and then he had got a job in the Far East and pursued his career there, and we had lost touch. Um, my leaving present from that hotel was some nice bottles of wine,
Mm.
which I had kept over the years. And then for some reason, he was just in my mind, and I made up my mind that I was going to get back in touch with him. And what ended up happening was I went to stay with him and his family in Provence in the south of France one summer. And I thought it'd be really cool to take a bottle of this wine that had been presented by him and his colleagues to me as a leaving present for us to enjoy there.
Fantastic.
Now, while we were there, he told me about an abbey nearby that he thought would be cool to go and visit. So we went.
Yeah.
And when we get there, there's this elderly guy walking around singing Gregorian chant music
Wow.
just in this empty abbey.
Mm.
And so I said to Francois, "What's going on? Can you go?" My French is not very good, and I just asked him to go and find out. So he goes and has a chat with this guy, and the guy stood in the middle of this space, and then he stood with his back against a wall, and he just sang one note and then stopped, and it just went on and on and on. It was just amazing. Then on the way out, Francois noticed that his CDs were for sale in the Abbey, and so bought one, got the guy to sign it, and we got in the car. And on the way back, we were just talking about how we had no plan to create that experience, and yet I'm telling you now, it's stuck with me for however many years it's been since that time.
Yeah.
Now, this is a kind of long-winded way to get to this point. Faith, sometimes people associate with fate,
Yes.
and that everything is predetermined, and that's faith in religion and all of that.
Yep.
Whereas there's another version of faith which is, um, I'm completely detached. I know that nothing is certain, but I'm comfortable with that.
Mm.
And what will happen will happen. And let's just see what it can be and enjoy it when it's good and just get over it when it's not, which is a very different application of faith. So I'm curious to hear from you about your view on those two very different versions.
It's it's interesting. They are very different, and at the same time, I'm noticing just from my own perspective, the more and more they become intertwined in some peculiar fashion as well. Um, it makes me think of the Islamic phrase of inshallah, just God willing, and how that can be applied to either one of those moments, either the moment of assurance of that someone is taking care of me. I don't need to know, but what the specifics of each are going to be. And yet I know there is something being provided. And you take refuge in that house of knowing, if you will, and you surrender the need to try to understand it in that way. And simultaneously, then there's the seemingly opposite of, look, I know nothing's going to happen. I don't even know if someone's really taking care of anything up there. And yet we're moving forward, and I can take solace in also being an agent, a creator of that next step. And I'm finding ways for each of them to dance together. I believe, on a consciousness level, there is something that's animating all of what life is. What that specifically is, God knows. um, and how to allow for things, especially in our language, where I think over the years as well, we've either intentionally or unintentionally invited a dangerous polarity into our means of communicating with either something being or not being the case. And it makes me think of the likes of Nora Bateson. She's been working in what she terms warm data. And what I've kind of taken from the gist of this kind of a project is seeking to hold space for the multiplicity of realities simultaneously, and not disregard or discredit one as being more true or less true than the other, but equally valid. And okay, what kind of tapestry does truth look like from this perspective? And I find that in my practice, my own personal practice of faith, I have days where I lean into where I may feel smaller, and yet I take, either through meditation or whatnot, I come in touch with something where I'm like, I'm being taken care of. And there's other days where I feel much more as if I'm in a driver's seat, and I'm, painting the path of destiny with my own paintbrush. Um, and just a very succinct and concise response to your question, if I remember the question correctly, is I seek to how can they be friends with each other? I would say is how I'm engaging with
Yeah,
those two.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's a great answer. Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether you've come across a guy called Shrikumar Rao. So he's based in the US, Indian heritage. He's a kind of super coach, that kind of
Mm.
guy. And he does a regular blog or whatever he calls it. And it was this piece about him going to a fun fair with his grandson,
Mm.
and they went on a ride, one of these rides where you sit in a car and you go out on the track and all of this sort of stuff, but it's taking you where it wants to go. You're not actually in control of the car.
Yeah.
And he said they went on this ride. His grandson really enjoyed it, and said, "Can we go again?" Really excited. And so he said to his grandson, "Yeah, we can." And you drove very, very well. And his grandson was really pleased, and off they set again. But then he gets to the point about how in our lives, he suggests, we think we're driving, but actually we're not.
Yes.
And I love your answer because of being able to embrace both. Because I sometimes struggle with this. Well, is what you do important or is it not? Because it feels like it should be in some cases, but it's not the be all and end all, right? Because some things can just blow whatever you do out of the water completely.
Oh, it's a fantastic question. Because essentially you're asking the question of how do we value things, really? How do we come to value one deed, act, event, moment against another one? And it's really a profoundly animated question to ask as I recognize in my own process at the moment. Um, a lot of things are being thrown up in that regard, where what was valuable for me or perceived as valuable at a period of time is less so now. It doesn't mean that it's not, but the metric, the spectrum of it shifts and changes. And I think it's just really healthy to to give ourselves permission for that change to take place. And at the end of the day, there's two things there. We should always respect how our own heart and being feels in response to something, and not to discredit that. Um, and to know that that is also a sacred space, which is in certain respects, if we're able to protect it from anyone else's judgment or view, perception, opinion about the event or the piece of art, whatever it may be. Um, and then there's on the global kind of sphere, I may make a song and it impacts maybe three people's lives. And there's another artist and it is able to impact 1 million people's lives. Is the other one more valuable than the other? In certain metrics, yeah, very clearly. But on the broader stage of life as a whole, my most honest answer is I don't know. I don't get to make that judgment. We don't get to make that judgment. Um, Others around us can. And I think, especially in the realm of art, just to kind of lean into that, this friend of mine, or was it Andy Warhol? I think he even said, you cannot understand a piece of artwork and its respective value until it's shared, until people have a chance to respond to it. And I think with regards to any form of value, it needs to be a conversation. Um, any piece of work and whatnot. Firstly, there's the conversation with ourselves and the piece that is its own respective right. And then with the broader world and everyone's, the constellation of opinions which can come with it. And all are valid. That's, yeah.
Yeah, and I think what you're touching on here is the value of judgment, because I think people seem to attach a whole ton of value to making a judgment.
Oh,
Whereas, who's to say it's worth very much at all? Because, when you, like you were talking about, when you attach value to a moment or an action or something that happens, an event, it doesn't just happen in isolation and
no.
cannot therefore be judged in isolation because it's connected to a whole host of other things that might or might not happen. And so,
Yes.
in a way, I'm feeling that this conversation is taking us to, or taking me, I suppose, to the important thing is just to decide what you're going to do. And not really, it's not really about whether it's the best choice or not, because you don't know. But it is about
Yes.
deciding something.
Yes, completely. This makes me think of the concept of just discernment, right, as well, in choosing what it is that we do. And I think you hit the nail on the head, Alan. And simply, we have to make a decision towards an action. Um, and an important thing to remember there as well, which maybe sound cliche or easy to say, is a non-action is also an action.
Yeah.
And it can seem a bit trite to say, but a lot of people, I think, miss that. And I've take the pains just to emphasize it from a standpoint of three questions, which I find important in evaluating, shall we say, judging, discerning if we're making constructive steps is, what did I actually plan to do? What did I do? And what are the insights I have based on having asked those two questions in the spirit of the next step? And the second question is so important, where even if you haven't done anything, not doing something is having done something. What have I learned from having not
Yeah.
called or shown up to this conversation?
Yeah.
How do I feel consequential of that? And to just be sincere about that, and be honest. I think that's something which we struggle with like you said, in the setup of this particular conversation. There are certain games of this nature or processes of this nature which can be quite formulaic in a certain regard, and consequently people's engagement with it, they haven't forethought, about what their appropriate response should
Mhm.
be.
Mhm.
And in many ways, your appropriate response is likely, in more often than not, an inauthentic response, and to be super blunt about it, a lie. And that's a really dangerous space to give yourself consistent permission to step into, especially if you're seeking to discern your path forward. You're not going to be gaining any clarity. I can speak from my own experience in deluding yourself in that regard. And but at the same time, only through doing so have I come to realize what the truer truths are. So you got to walk your walk.
Yeah, that's what it's coming down to, and it comes back to coming back to faith. I think it is about having a strong sense of faith in yourself,
Yeah,
in other people, in the circumstances that will unfold ahead of you, and kind of feeling this sense of whatever happens, because you're not able to tell, it
yeah,
will be okay.
yes,
And that stops all of this, oh, I should have, I could have, and which is a total waste of time.
it is a total waste of time. It can maybe a moment serve its purpose for you to get in touch with the grief. I think also coming in touch with our emotions in that regard for things having not been done can be a tremendous fuel as well for us, which shouldn't just be disregarded. But once you get to that point, if you just end up in cycles of self-sabotaging language and things of this nature, then it's not a constructive space anymore. Then we're just hurting ourselves again. But I recognize, like, even the importance of crying and coming in touch with things which I wish I had done differently, or a thing where I have hurt someone in a moment, but now I can learn from it, from what they've shared with me, and allowing things to really cleanse and actually move and process the clarity which can emerge from that space too.
Yeah. I think there's something slightly different. So I'm differentiating here between,
Mm.
I think what you've touched on is revisiting what happened
Yeah,
and considering what you could have done differently, what you
yeah,
might have done differently.
yeah.
But there's no guarantee that if you did something differently.
This is true. This
So
is
yeah, it's now you've reminded me of something else here. I was told a guy who used to read and not read, make up stories for his kids when he was putting them to sleep.
mm,
And his kids really enjoyed the stories so much that the next morning they would always, because they'd fallen asleep before the
yeah,
end, they would say, Daddy, what happened? What happened in the story? And so he decided that he was going to write them up. It was a good thing to do. So I think there were about 200 of them. Then he was diagnosed with cancer and he was hospitalized,
mm,
and it wasn't sure, people weren't sure about how much time he had left. And his wife and kids thought it would be a really cool thing to do to take his 200 stories that he had written up into hospital, so that he could read them or they could read him. I'm not sure what happened. Um, anyway, this kind of rekindled his connection with those stories. He survived,
mm.
and they are now a TV series across something like 30 countries in the world and an amazing commercial success.
Wow.
Now, who could have guessed that contracting cancer would have resulted in such a positive outcome?
This is the wonderful mystery, right? Um, this is the wonderful mystery, and it, from my readings of ancient traditions as well, the only word that comes to mind is karma in this respect. And I know in the West we have a skewed understanding and definition, and I'm not saying by any stretch of imagination that mine is correct, but from what I have understood is that there is this web of understanding and guidance, stewardship, if you will, which is moving through each and every one of us. And from our earthly perspective, when we see or we hear of someone that's been diagnosed with something in that regard, our immediate response is oftentimes like, "Oh, poor thing, how sad, how unfortunate," and that may be the case, but it may be the greatest opportunity for that respective individual that they've ever encountered in their life. It may engage a process of transformation so deep that their entire being for the rest of their days on this earth is more in alignment with actually what they should be doing. And it's really unfair in times to prejudge it as just, oh, that's a terrible thing. We don't have that. We can't look into the future and say that with assuredness. Same when I remember actually a real life example of this. I remember when things ended with an ex-partner of mine, one of my closest friend. He's an elder from North Carolina. And he said to me, he's just like, looks at me, he's like, oh, congratulations. And I remember just being like, what the fuck? this, And he's explained, he proceeded to say, look, well, if she's decided to leave, that's opened up tremendous space for you to meet someone who's going to want to be with you and stay. And entire perspective on when to say congratulations and where not was changed in that moment.
Yeah.
And it has since. And my judgment of what is seemingly to the outside someone a terrible or an amazing moment, I'm like, yeah, we'll see. Let's give it a few days, give it a few weeks.
What that's doing is reconfirming what we were talking about earlier about not wasting so much effort and energy on this judgment piece,
Exactly.
rather than just, okay, so what's next? That's where you want to put your energy.
Exactly.
But you touched on also this thing about karma and is there something looking after us and all this sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I have to confess that I find this tricky space to talk
Yeah.
about because I'm not religious. I don't believe that there's a God sitting up there and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But things happen too much that are kind of spooky for there not to be something there. And I'll just share a quick story, and then I've got a question for you. So I was driving to a location in Wales to deliver a workshop, and on the way there, I was driving through a rural part of Wales,
Mm.
and my car cut out, just stopped. So it's like an hour and a half before the start of the workshop. And I'm like, well, I hope when I call for the rescue service, they're going to be able to get here in time and all of that. So take the phone out, no signal.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, oh, okay, so I'm going to have to go and knock on somebody's door, disturb somebody, get out of the car, look around, no houses.
Mm-hmm.
So now it's what on earth do I do? And then 10 minutes later, a tow truck drove by and stopped, and the guy got out and he said, have you got a problem? And he towed me to the place that I was going. And when I told somebody this story in New York, he said, man, you do realize that that was an angel. And I'm like, well, I can't do that, but yeah, I get where you're
Yeah.
going.
I mean, that's a wonderful story, first and foremost. And it's an interesting question to ask yourself as well, Alan. And I'm sure you do, but just to give further permission, you say you can't do that. It's worth asking why not. Why you can't give yourself permission to frame them in that way, you know?
Yes, it is a good question, and I guess it's the bit of my brain that seeks to know. But over probably the last decade or so, I'm much more comfortable with not knowing and just enjoying because I love, that story, like you say, is just brilliant, and I don't really care whether there is somebody there or not. It happened, so good.
No, 100%, 100%. And I share with you, I think that's where my growing faith comes from, I think, or I sense is there's been too many moments in life where I sense, hey, this is too uncanny for it not to be um, orchestrated in some form. To what extent it is or it isn't, I don't know. For all we know, it could be a whole simulation, right? And it's completely programmed, and you know, that's a lens that just the human level. It's like what Kant would say between the phenomenal world. We've got this. We engage with it. All good. The noumenal world, that bit slightly beyond our initial experience. Yeah, it's there, but I can't really say anything about it. Just really almost tongue in cheek. Um, and but I do notice, and it's not even a thought. It's a feeling and a sense internally, very much inside the body. And I notice more and more connections and serendipitous moments occurring when I allow that to be more of the lead. Our
Yeah.
connection is case in point in that regard as well, in some of the conversations that we've had. Um, yeah,
You're
it's
making me smile, Jack, because I sometimes, on in conversations with people, I use the matrix as, is this something that, and I do believe that we create systems and processes in modern society that do encourage a certain behavior. So to a certain extent, I think there is something there already. But you're
yeah.
making me laugh inside with your piece about maybe it's all pre-programmed, and I was thinking, yeah, what we're doing is racking up karma credits, and then they're paid out, and there's a balance that's being maintained by some sort of other entity, and looking down on us, and it's like judging all of these people running around living their lives.
Well, let me just jump on that for a moment and make it smaller and a little bit more intimate. We do it in our own lives. And if I let me explain it as follows. If we pay attention to our own energy when we're either in a better or a worse situation, say a job, think back to some of the work which you may have been doing in the hotel space versus the style of work that you're doing now. How was the energy each morning that you were anticipating the day that you had in front of you? um you know, if you compare one to the other, my guess is, and I could be completely wrong, right, but now that there is more lightness, more joy, playfulness in the engagement with life that you have now versus then, and in certain regards I also see that itself as like the karma credit. How well am I moving, in this grand arena? If I go try sit in a corporate space, I'm gonna begin to shrivel up. My energy is gonna become. I'll probably form hypertension, things of this nature. It's not the playing field that I can be the best athlete, essentially. But if I'm in spaces such as this, you can flourish, you can move, I can be free, it can be me, it can be my expression. Um, and with that, there is almost like an internal karma bank and debt which we have when we do things which are nurturing and healthy for us. We're richer, we feel richer, we stand differently, we converse with others. There's a greater sense of self-confidence. Whereas in the other space, we collapse, we begin to shrink. And so just to take the little idea of, something much larger, and I think if we develop the awareness and we stay attentive to what environments do with us and vice versa, what we do with environments too, I think that's super important. If we can learn how to recognize these things, we're taking care of our own banking,
Yeah,
in that regard.
totally agree with you. And actually, this relates to some work I'm doing with a colleague at the moment, Meryl. Alizada in the area of kindness, and we've created this thing that we're calling a solar, but spelt with a U after the O, solar
Yeah.
system of kindness.
Wow.
And it's three circles of stuff.
Mm.
The outer circle is the environment, and this is both physical and psychological. Then the next ring in is intention. So this is maintaining a focus that is the intention to be kind.
Yeah.
And then the final center ring is action. So this is taking the specific action to be kind.
Yeah.
But I think this relates to what you were talking about because, first you have to deal with the environment.
Yeah.
So, um, if your best place as an athlete in life is a golf course as opposed to a rugby pitch, then you need to create that environment accordingly.
You go.
Then the next ring in is that you must never allow the actions just to become a process.
Mm.
They must be underpinned by the intention, because if you're just giving somebody a book without the intention of being kind, it won't feel kind.
No.
They will receive it, they will have the book, but it won't feel right.
No.
So it's those three rings of environment, intention, and action that applies to this, I think, as well.
100%. The intention one, it really just hinges on authenticity, right?
Yeah.
And it's one of those strange things where pinning it down, what that is in terms of words, you're like, yeah, good luck. And then you see it, you experiencing it, and it is the most black, white, clear cut thing in life. It's when you engage a performance or a speech or even a conversation, and you can tell that the people engaged is really sincere. It's clear as day. And the moment it isn't, you know it, you feel it, you feel the tension. It's but putting it into a codified formula, yeah, and that's another question. And also, I don't think the worthy question. It's not about seeking to make something formulaic in that regard, because everyone is unique, and yet the kind of the diagram or the framework that you offer is just that. It's something which can be used if useful, and if not, let it be.
Yeah.
Find your own way.
Yeah.
Yeah, intention, man. I'm noticing more and more how my life is changing the more intentional I am with my engagements. um, it's honestly, it's a superpower that other traditions have been clued in on for generations, and in our also very rich part of the world, also spiritually in its own respects, aside from a lot of the tragedy which is associated with it. There are some beautiful esoteric and aesthetic practices from our own kind of, even the Celtics, that we can learn to remember more of, I think, and bring into the present as a balm and as a medicine of sorts, to aid us through this wild, meandering path that we call the present into the future.
Well, that's a brilliant way, I think, for us to start to draw this values jam to a close. I can't believe the time has just flown by, and this is the final question for you.
Yeah.
So, what are you encouraged to do differently about
Mm.
faith as a result of this conversation?
Oh, to continue to continue allowing myself to expand further into this space and in this journey, which I've already been walking into and opening broader. But this is a further anchor point and, um, nugget of encouragement of keep walking, just keep walking. I know you're a Man U fan, but it makes me think of the Liverpool. You'll never walk alone, and I think that's a huge thing with faith. Even when we are alone, even in ourselves, there's who we think we are, and then there's really who we are and what we are. And in that, I notice for myself, I'm never truly alone. when I give myself permission to see and feel that. And so it's that, to keep walking intentionally.
Okay, great answer. And mine relates to intention as well, because I have a tendency to want to systematize things to make things easier. Um, but like we've discussed, if you do that at the cost of losing the intention,
Yeah.
you've lost more than you think. Because whilst on the face of things, everything is happening, if it's happening without intention, it won't be perceived as well, potentially by a large degree.
Yeah.
So this conversation has reminded me to always, always, always keep intention at mind and in hand and in heart, actually. So, Jack, thank you so much for this values jam. You're now a qualified values jammer.
That's what's up, man. Thank you, Alan. Appreciate it, my friend.
Cheers.
Pleasure. Take care.